Hello, I'm Neta Bodner and I'm an architectural historian. My research is about religious architecture in the Middle Ages. That doesn't really sound like the right training for talking about architecture in Tel Aviv. But actually, the aim of this short video is to show you the value of stopping and noticing any work of architecture, be it medieval, classical, or modern. When looking at buildings, you can often uncover intention, details through which the design was intended to reel you in, to facilitate some kind of process. I want to show you how I do this by looking at two buildings, the two wings of the Tel Aviv Museum of Art, which is marking 90 years to its foundation in year 2022. As we look at them, I'll guide you through some of the concepts that help think about architecture in general, from whatever period. Ultimately, I hope this talk will serve as an invitation to look more closely at your daily environments, to appreciate the well-designed spaces, and to work towards improving those which are not. Even before I set foot in the building, the design manipulates my experience. There's a wide square with trees and statues separating me from the busy street and from my everyday pace. If I let it, a square like this can function like kind of a shower before an evening event. It can wash away the day and give a moment to put on new energies and change the atmosphere. In other words, the piazza here gives me time to prepare for going into the museum, and also time to look at it from afar. What do I see when I look at the whole from the other side of the square? This earth-resting building is situated solidly on the ground. It's stable and balanced, comprised of squares and rectangles. The rectangular masses give a sense of weight and of stability. But notice how the corner is supported only by slim columns, giving a sense that the large mass is lightly but stably floating in the air. Which it is, because enforced concrete can hold its own weight, a characteristic that can be shown off and was shown off by many architects, especially modernist architects. And between the columns, under the concrete, the shadows add a third dark color to the facade, alongside the light beige of stone dressing and the soft brown of exposed concrete. This is not earth-rooted architecture, which seems to merge into the materials of its surroundings. But the materials here are common in the local architecture, and they are used in a way which exposes their natural characteristics and their natural colors. From the outside and from the inside of this building, there are visual cues which tell me that I'm standing in front of a public monument. But this wasn't always the case. The Tel Aviv Museum was begun in 1932 in a private house owned by Mayor Dizengoff, the mayor of Tel Aviv at the time. Dizengoff converted his own home in Rothschild Avenue to serve as a public museum of art in order to substantiate the cultural role and standing of the city of Tel Aviv. To make Dizengoff's living space suitable for showing art, the lower level was converted into galleries, and new wings were added at the back of the building. In 1959, however, the collection temporarily moved to the Helena Rubinstein Pavilion, which was especially designed for that purpose. But already in 1964, the municipality of Tel Aviv announced an architectural competition to design a larger museum. Dan Eitan and Yitzhak Yashar submitted the design which won, and which was the basis for the building that you see here. This main wing of the museum was inaugurated in 1971, 50 years before the filming of this video in 2021. If you ask me, one of the reasons their design was chosen was perhaps the way that these architects orchestrated a multi-step visitor experience. Let's go into the building and see what stations it comprises. Walking into the space, I find myself in a wide atrium. The first ceiling above me is low, but I can see that just beyond the threshold, the space becomes a little higher. This is a common and extremely effective way to invite people to pause, look around, and then move naturally forward to the source of the light. Beyond is a higher space, the main atrium. At its tallest, it reaches 15 meters and spans 900 meters of space. With light coming from the high ceiling above, it's natural to want to move forward and look upwards. These are things I always immediately notice because they've been so central to church design for more than a millennium and a half. The ping-pong between lower and higher ceilings with elevated light is a tried and tested mechanism for giving visitors a sense of orientation, awe, and separation from the day-to-day. The elevated windows provide an added bonus. The architecture disconnects me from the outside world. Do you notice that there are almost no windows here, which show the city? This is not accidental. It focuses attention inwards and upwards, communicating the importance of the internal space. Across the atrium, the lower ceiling frames the next point in the visitor's journey, a ramp leading to the galleries. The movement across the entrance and up the ramp gives me time to look, to feel the air temperature, to peek up at the rays, to choose which of the gallery spaces to visit first. When I arrive at the gallery, the ceiling quickly becomes lower and the space is smaller. This helps create an intimate viewing experience in which I can stand in front of a work of art and give it my undivided attention. Thinking again about historic architectural tropes, this is one of the ways religious buildings have provided meaningful visitor experiences over the centuries, by dedicating small spaces to individual, intimate experiences within the larger prayer halls. This has been true of churches and of some mosques, in which lower, smaller spaces were dedicated to giving the most anonymous individuals a moment of separated silence and introspection. Another thing to look at in a modern or a historical building is the materiality and how it shapes the aesthetics. The materials here are similar to those we saw outside: exposed concrete, a stone floor, and sparse use of wood and white plaster. What kind of color scheme does this achieve? Much of the space is grey and beige, like the exterior of the building. Light is a strong actor in the ambience of the space, as are the different renderings of the concrete. All the interior columns here are made of concrete. This one has a combed surface. How was the person who was in charge of this column create the grooves and the niches which you see here? How did the builders keep them from collapsing, warping, and changing their shapes? Every straight or curved line that we see in this, or indeed in any building, was made by a person who had to work hard to get that specific result. The final visual effect very much depends on how the materials were mixed. How were they used? In concrete, the aggregates, which are these little stones which you see here, mixed with the cement, the sand, and the water, can be bigger or they can be smaller. When they're large, such as this case, or colorful, they can be seen in the final result. When they're small and gray, the concrete is finer, and the effect is absolutely different. In the scale of large public buildings, this can have a great effect in the overall. I think the reason for looking at these details is in order to remember that aesthetics consist of the larger picture, but also of the tiny details, such as the surface of the column or the material of the handrails. Each of these has to be thought out, from the level of the individual builder putting together the stone, mortar, cement, and sand, how and where they're mixed, and what relations. At the same time, the architect needs to design an overall beautiful space, functionally fitting, statically sound, and that means a building that doesn't fall down, realistic to build, and suited to its purposes. All this planning occurs on the page, in 3D modeling, and indeed in the architect's imagination. Years before the first person will ever set foot in the building, an architect has to imagine what it would be like, for example here, to move from the main space to the galleries, and try to make that movement as aesthetic, practical, and meaningful as possible. After it's all done, though changes inevitably sometimes have to be made. For example, here at the museum, the space had to be expanded. So in 2011, a new wing was built, following a design by architect Preston Scott Cohen. The new wing, named after Herta and Paul Amir, did not try and connect seamlessly to the main building. Rather, Scott Cohen opted for one that uses completely different visual and spatial language. It seems at first glance as if there's almost nothing in common between the two buildings. However, having analyzed the main building, it's now worth noticing some similarities in approach. For example, here too, I first walk into a lower, shadowy hallway before stepping into a higher atrium lit from above. While the colors are different, the materials are comparable. The concrete, which was the main material of the main building, was used here in a different way. Exposed concrete was molded in curved lines rather than solid verticals and horizontals. Can you see these lines? They're the remnants of the way it was constructed. Concrete is a liquid material when you work with it, usually poured into wooden or metal molds. What you see here is the texture of the wood into which the concrete was originally poured. Think what it must have looked like when the building was being built, like a huge ship made of wooden planks laid closely one next to the other. Each plank of wood was nailed to those next to it. It all had to be supported with scaffolding beams to be strong enough to hold the sheer weight of the concrete when it was wet, because concrete can only hold its own weight when dry. Someone had to calculate the angles in which to build the planks in order to pour the concrete so that this would be the resulting negative image. Therefore, how hard was it to plan a three-dimensional space such as this? How many people had to work to make it look so easy? Whether you like this space or not, it's interesting, in my opinion, to think about what went into designing and realizing it in the way that it currently stands. What were some of the architectural issues at hand when this building was being designed? One of the problems was size versus height. There were limitations on how high the building could go, so 3 viewing levels were dug underground. It's a challenge to create comfortable spaces with good natural lighting below ground level. How would you go about designing rooms that are pleasant under the earth? One of the ways is to try and use as much natural light as possible. That's one of the functions of this atrium, which is both a walkway and a funnel for light to run all the way from the top to the bottom of the Herta and Paul Amir wing, 26.5 meters from its head to the part underground. How was all of this calculated? To some extent, this depended on computer-aided manipulations. In fact, the whole plan began from a simple triangle, mandated by the shape of the plot. A computer program twisted it into the seemingly amorphous shape we see from the inside and from the outside. Unlike the main building, we don't have one piazza from which to view the entire exterior of the Amir wing, but it's still useful to take a look and understand how some of the special characteristics work. For example, notice the materiality. We're still discussing concrete, but it has a different characteristic. It was poured into metal rather than wooden mold, and it has a lighter hue, which is part of the hue of the cement, which is used in its mixing. This creates a bit of strange materiality, which almost makes me want to reach out and touch it to understand what the building comprises of, because it doesn't seem like the material which it is. One of the ways to get this atmosphere as well is the fact that the base is narrower than wider parts of the building which overhang it. And the way that the orthogonals converge means that the building looks a bit like a piece of paper which has been folded as origami. It takes a lot of effort to make such a heavy building seem so light. And it's one of the things which make this monument what your textbook was defined as an earth-dominating piece of architecture, because it's a building which almost doesn't let you ignore it as you walk past. In any case, the huge investment in this building, financial and otherwise, is part of what makes this piazza a reflection of the society's ideals. The piazza includes the Opera House, the Camry Theatre, the Bet Ariella Library, and of course the 2 buildings of the museums. The way that they're organized and given precedence as architectural works of art reflects the fact that they're important to the people that built them at the different points in time and to the society that upkeeps and invested them in the first place. This is actually the point at which all the elements of the lecture converge together, a point which says that when monumental architecture is given investment by a society, it shows something of the ideals that that society holds. A following point is that architecture is one of the most important and significant things which we have as a community. If I walk into a wonderful building, it can make me feel at ease and at awe. Buildings which are badly planned can be confusing, frustrating, and actually depress the people that use and enter them. On the other hand, when buildings are well planned as works of art as well as architecture, they can actually be the light of someone's day. Thank you very much.